Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is our very first episode of The Grave American. I'm your host, Justice Graves, and I want to welcome you all here. This is our first real episode, and hopefully this will be very interesting and relevant to what's going on today. I first want to mention what the title of our episode is. It is How Nothing Got Resolved in the 2020 Election, and we're going to talk about the state of the nation, so just be aware of that. Full disclosure, I am using a new program to go through and transition when I'm speaking and going through some of the material here. We are going to do some stuff on screen, so you're going to see some stuff like that. You will also see some material that is in the description. Everything that we do, just like in the first flashpoint, there will be descriptions with links to a lot of the different things that we talk about. So please look in the description below. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe, like, share, the whole shebang, and turn on that little notification button, that little notification bell. So we are just going to get through this. I apologize. I was looking at something else. All right. So, with regards to the topic of this particular episode, with regards to the 2020 election, we're going to just try and aggregate everything for you. And we're going to talk a lot about the backlash that has happened because of what has happened in the election. We are not going to talk about the litigation that's been going on. We're going to focus more on the Senate and the House races, mainly because those are the most interesting ones. We are not going to talk about the presidential race so much as you would think. However, there are some opinions that I will have about that. We're going to try and keep this particular episode opinion-free. My opinions are going to be, and I'll mention this at the end of the episode, in a later segment on this particular topic, because the 2020 election is it's its own microcosm of events and, push and pull, result, action, that sort of material. So just be aware of that we're going to try and keep this without opinion. I will offer commentary, so just be aware of that. And we're just going to kind of go straight into it. The promised blue wave, the House was supposed to go over, double digits in terms of its new lead. Yeah, it already was in double digits in terms of its lead, but it was supposed to grow by double digits. There's supposed to be very clear control of the Senate, and then, of course, win the presidency. As we all should be aware by now, that is not what happened. Regardless, and I want to be very clear here, regardless of what people are saying. So let's be brutally honest here. Donald Trump may have been ousted. That did not truly go down when it came to the House and the Senate races. Right now, we are in a very highly contested Senate. The House does, at 222 projected, because some of the results are still being finalized. There are actually a few races in the House that are still being heavily contested. And that's because they're within 1,000 votes. So some of these different congressional districts are within 1,000 votes. There's one particular one in New York that I'll highlight later on in the episode. But in particular, that's a 222 House Democratic majority. You need 218 in the House of Representatives in order to have a majority. The reason for that is that there are a set amount of House Representatives, and that's 435. Cut that in half. It's not even 218 is what you got to round up, because there's no such thing as a half of a person. Now, with regards to that, if you do the quick math, since there are only 222 House Democrats projected to have their seats or to have a seat in the U.S., House of Representatives in the 117th Congress, which will run from 2021 to 2022 or a little bit of 2023, what's going to happen is there's only a 4-person majority. 4 or 5-person majority. I might not be doing my math right. I believe it's probably a 5-person majority because add the 2018 person. And what that means is that when it came to the big issues, and you saw this particularly with COVID relief, there is no room for error. If enough Democrats do not want a proposal, it will not pass in the House. There are everything has to be passed at least by majority. There are some special items that have to be passed by 2/3 majority. which is called a supermajority, if you have that much representation that you can afford that. We haven't seen that in a very long time. This is not even, this isn't even a healthy majority. This is the slimmest margins in the House in a very long time historically. Same in the Senate, because the Senate's going to be determined by a 1 senator difference. Right now, if you haven't heard about it, we are talking about the Senate runoff elections in Georgia between Perdue versus Ossof and then Loeffler versus Warnock. If you don't know who Perdue is, he is the sitting senator from Georgia. He is slightly controversial for his actions in the past. Loeffler is more controversial because she is an appointee. She was not elected. That is why she is in currently a special election that is now turned into a runoff. One of the things I want to point out is, how did this happen in Georgia? Certain places do not have primaries or do not have primaries that restrict their parties to only put one person in for the general election. Georgia is one of those states. So when you run in Georgia, you have to win 50% of the vote outright in order to win a general election when it comes to a Senate seat. Now, and I believe that may apply to House rules as well, but not House rules, but the House as well. But we know in the Senate that is for a fact the case. With regards to that, both Loeffler and Perdue, who were seated to do well, did not meet that cutoff. Perdue got very close. He got 49.7%. I can look at that really quick and show you and show that transitioning. But that's particularly the situation I might show you in a second. Georgia is very close. He almost took it and it didn't have to go to special election. Let me switch this over. It's going to take a few button presses. Here we go. Perdue versus Ossof, 49.7. This was the general election. This was November 3rd. Very close, a couple thousand more votes, even a couple hundred more. I don't know what the actual projection would have been or what the actual numbers are, but that would have led him to get 50%. You just need 50% according to the law, and that's it. Loeffler was way off. The problem with that is, of course, because her other opponent, the person who wanted to be, Senator Collins, who's not a senator, obviously, is not going forward, took 20% away, 20 plus 25, or 20 plus 26 if you want to round up. That's 46 in the special election or the runoff election. She's in a special election that is now turned into a runoff election. I know that's complicated, but keep with us here. That is going to 46, I believe, will get her across the finish line. Warnock has some issues. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Or, we might as well talk about it right now. So the reason why this sort of happened the way that it did is that in Georgia specifically, they did not, how do I put it? Perdue had issues and so did Ossof, but Ossof had more issues than Perdue. So why did that happen? And I'm going to find the specific video or podcast on this because I was listening to a podcast that Megyn Kelly did where she had a specific guest that detailed this out very explicitly, and it was a compelling discussion on the issue of why Ossof and Warnock, the Democratic runners, who forced this to go into a runoff but did not outright win, even though that was the hope, so that the Democrats would take the Senate. What ended up happening is that Ossof does not do well, particularly with minority voters, because he doesn't seem like someone that comes from Georgia. He's run in several races before. You can look up his electoral history. His candidacies, his multiple candidacies, he doesn't do well with regards to minority voters. Georgia is primarily a minority voter state and an evangelical state. So you have to do well not only with people who are non-white, but you have to do well with people who are also heavily religious. There are other religions, of course, that play into this as well, that mix and match a little bit here. That is generally what we see with regards to the Perdue versus Ossof race. Perdue, of course, did better with the evangelicals being in the GOP, generally speaking. Ossof did not do well. Ossof did not do well with regards to being somebody that Georgians can be confident in and, confident in terms of he's going to represent them well, because Ossof is, generally speaking, a white Caucasian, and not only that, he doesn't have that particular Georgian accent. He doesn't have certain mannerisms that, Perdue does have. So it does hurt Ossof greatly. When it comes to specifically Warnock doesn't do well with the reverse. He doesn't do well with, I believe, suburban white women. And that's what hurt him. Warnock, for those of you who don't know, is a pastor. He is a minority voter himself, who is, of course, he is a minority male voter, who, of course, is against Loeffler, who is a Caucasian female, which is creating, of course, an interesting dynamic. There's also an interesting dynamic that also occurred because of where people are located in the state of Georgia, that more people, and this is why this particular situation came up with Perdue versus Ossof, and I'll get off the screen here, is because with regards to both of these races, people who were in northern Georgia chose to put a tally in one of the Senate races, but not the other. You could do both. That's how this works, because you vote for both senators at large. However, northern Georgians voted in one election and not the other. When they choose to exclude one, some voted in southern Georgia for one or the other, and then some people only put a president and didn't do any of the Senate races. So that is what made this more complicated, is that had those votes gone, if you look at, who was Biden, the blank but Biden ballots versus the blank but Trump ballots, you would have seen an interesting situation arise with regards to the current election in Georgia. However, now it's turned into an entire campaign. Anyone is down there, including Representative Ocasio-Cortez from the 12th Congressional District in New York. We will talk about her in just a moment because she is very interesting right now. She is in Georgia. Not only is she in Georgia, she is campaigning for both Ossof and Warnock, and it's not going as well as people would hope. It's a toss-up race. Right now, what is the projection from Politico? Politico's projection, and I will put this up again. Politico's projection is that at least one of them, this is what this red bar means, that one of them will go red, one of them will go neutral. It's a toss-up. We have 50 right now for the Republican side, so all they need is one more, and then it's over. If it stays at 50, if both seats go to the Democrats, if Ossof and Warnock succeed, what ends up happening is that Kamala Harris, who is the current vice president-elect, who would be the president-elect of the Senate right now, she would be the tiebreaker vote. That's how the Senate works in general. What am I want to look at? We'll talk about New York in a minute. But we'll talk about the House. Look at the House real quick. I'll show you some of those races that are still ongoing. And this link is in the description, so there are two items that I'm going to show you that are a little bit interactive, like this map that I'm showing you right here, and then there's another map specifically for people in Massachusetts. I will try and look and see if I can find other maps to the one I'm going to show you later on in the episode for some of the other New England states when it specifically comes to this election, but for right now, we'll just go over this. For example, in New York State, the 22nd district is pretty much razor thin when it comes to who is being elected. So they are reviewing that heavily. There's another one. Iowa's 2nd district. You can't see that quite so well. There we go. It's literally 50-50. And what's the difference? Oh, wow. That is a difference of 6 and 4, 1, 2. It's a difference of 6 votes. So 6 votes is the difference between another Republican or Democrat in Iowa's 2nd district of the House. Just to tell you how razor thin some margins came. The congressional seats are the more interesting ones. We'll talk about it more broadly in another episode, but actually Republicans expanded their majority in the states when it comes to governorships and houses and, the state houses and the state senates, which is where it sort of matters for 2021, because in 2021, we'll talk about this in another episode, but there's this issue of gerrymandering, which comes up every time the census happens. Gerrymandering is the more provocative term. What is typically called, what it is typically called in government is congressional redistricting. Congressional redistricting means that every couple of years after the census happens, they redraw the map. Some states lose reps, some states gain reps, and, it reorganizes the map. Whoever is the controlling party of that state in certain key positions, and it depends on a per state basis because they have the right to decide how they allocate and draw those congressional district lines. What that does is I don't know how best to word it. It creates some discrepancies. It can create a lot of people call it disenfranchisement. Some would extend it to fraud. Essentially what it is the more powerful party gets to dictate where the lines are drawn, and in that regard, they determine which populations control that particular election for those different congressional seats. With regards to that, that means that if you add a city into a congressional map with a bunch of rural towns, when before all of those rural towns were by themselves as a congressional district, what ends up happening is it may go from, because we know this, it may go from a GOP safe area and immediately flip over to a more Democratic, or it may flip to being more purple. Because honestly, that's what happens. In cities have higher populations, so as soon as you add a city's, borough, you're guaranteed that it's totally pushing the map in another direction. So we talked about that. I'm going to transition out of that. Right now, Joe Biden is basically considering the fact that it will be Mitch McConnell that he'll have to work with in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is acknowledging that now in a public tweet that has, garnered the ire of the current sitting president, Donald Trump. So that is the current situation. Now, when it comes to the House Democrats, there is a lot of infighting. So, for example, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is up for re-election with regards to her speakership, because that is another separate election that happens. In case you didn't know that, we may cover that if people don't understand. If you don't know any of the topics that we're talking about, please send them to questions.tga@gmail.com. That is our official questions email account, so that way we know to make videos about those specific topics. If you do know what they are, that's great. And also, if you don't want to send an email, you can also put it in the comments section, either on the videos, or you can comment on our Instagram whenever we post that we've put out the episodes. So you can do that as well. In the new Congress, they don't really want Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but they're going to re-elect her because they are unsure of what to do. They're also crying that cries for socialism, different, very aggressive and provocative statements like defund the police, and different movements that they associated with regards to that. There were other moves for different things regarding racial justice and a few other select topics regarding the economy and the environment that did not sit well with voters. And even though President Trump may have lost in the Electoral College, what has happened is that they got viciously, the Democrats got viciously torn down across ballot downstream, and I will opine on that on a later date as to why that happened. So a clear front runner for what would have been the speakership, Joe Kennedy III, who is a Democrat from my state, who ended up running for the senatorship that Ed Markey currently has in my state of Massachusetts. He ended up losing the primary, the Democratic primary for that election. He was a representative. He will no longer be a representative after the new Congress comes in. So what happens after the new Congress comes in during the new year? So what ends up happening is that he's ineligible. He's sort of a lost younger politician who, not lost, but lost as in he's not going to be within them. He's not going to be in the House of Representatives. He's not going to be able to have rank and file privileges and power. So what ends up happening is that he'll be sitting on the sidelines for a while, probably doing fundraising, probably doing who knows what, maybe cooling his heels for a possible presidential run. You never know with a Kennedy involved. However, with regards to that, he's not eligible for the speakership. He would have been a clear and obvious choice, but if you look at the pool of Democrats that are coming forward that would be possible picks, you're noticing very quickly that they are just not the type of personalities or the type of strong individuals that are like Nancy. Nancy truly is the only one with the chutzpah in order to do the current job. Doesn't mean she's the right person for it, as the Democrats believe in the Democratic Party and in the caucus as a whole. With regards to this particular situation, though, I want to highlight that Pelosi, in trying to appease, because she knows she has a very razor-thin majority right now, regardless of if those two particular seats flip, like we talked about with regards to Iowa and New York, what ends up happening is Pelosi is shifting towards a more moderate plan. This is also more in line with what Joe Biden's actual personal philosophies and politics are. So she's moving more towards, there are two specific conservative topics that she's added to the agenda for the next Congress that she wants to pursue. And that includes infrastructure, which is a Trump-era agenda item. And then she wants to also lower healthcare costs, which is also a Trump healthcare item. So, and that's plain and obvious if you look at the executive orders versus what happened in the, the House in the 116th and the 115th Congress. You will see that very blatantly, what was going on with the Trump administration versus now what Nancy Pelosi is pivoting towards. Now we're going to go and talk about, well, we're still talking about the poor House election results. We're going to talk about soon-to-be sophomore Representative Ocasio-Cortez. You probably know her better by her initials AOC. And she called out her caucus via Twitter after that very angry phone call that happened, where they basically freaked out because a bunch of people that should have won seats did not. And basically on Twitter, and she's been on a rant about this for a while, I specifically only highlighted in the description her tweets from November 5th and 6th. She's been going on a rant about this. She's talking specifically about how she tried to win re-election and how she thinks she won re-election. Analysis without some data analysis, either explicitly or inexplicably. And what's going on is there's this very aggressive back and forth. She's talked about how she may not want to be in politics anymore. She's pivoted back and forth on this. She's a Twitter personality for sure. She is also a sitting U.S. representative, and that leads to certain conflicts that have been going on with regards to her party. A lot of people are not happy about what she's saying. A lot of people are upset. It is turning off a lot of the more moderate Democrats. It's turning off even some of the far left, though to a much lesser extent. That level fluctuates. It really depends on what you're looking at. It's kind of gone up and down. And one quote from November 6th that I really want to highlight that sort of focuses in on this particular problem with her, and I'll opine on this in a later date, but I just wanted to bring it to the forefront of what's actually going on, is this controversial quote that she put on her personal Twitter account, not her other Twitter account, which is her official one, for being on a U.S., on the U.S. rap group. And she says, quote, "Is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future." End quote. From @AOC on November 6th, 2020. I have a lot I'd like to unpack on that. We're going to save that for when we do opinions on this particular piece, but wanted to bring that to the forefront. I have linked her Twitter account in the description, so please feel free to, rifle through it. I'm sure you'll find very interesting things. If you want to have more of a strong, concrete opinion on her, she lays everything out bare bones on that particular Twitter account. She has two Twitter accounts, like I was mumbling, but right before I got into this quote, she does have two Twitter accounts. One, the @AOC, is her personal open account, and then she has her special account since she is a congresswoman, where she posts more official things, and she doesn't do political things because, you're allowed to do that. Even as a sitting, it's how politics works. That's why it's how this all kind of goes. but you have different rules and restrictions for what you can say and what you cannot say with regards to the 2 Twitter accounts. So she can say whatever she wants at AOC. She can't necessarily do that through her official Congresswoman's account. Now, we are going to keep going through. There were as we all know, there were major Trump protests that happened, anti-Trump protests, pro-Trump protests that happened in Detroit, Michigan. They also went down to Lansing, which is the capital of Michigan. They also went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There are still some rallies going on. They're mostly concentrating on Georgia because of the 2 Senate races we talked about earlier. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about is the turnout from this election was record-breaking, and if you wanted to see the breakdown specifically of how this was record-breaking, you can look at Obama's record, and then you can look at the 2020 election when that finally comes out in terms of, those official records all being certified and finally going through and being put on the official government website after the new Congress comes in and after the new inauguration happens. So the popular vote was completely shattered, and it was previously held by Barack Obama when he ran against at the time, Senator John McCain. McCain lost in that election. Obama became the 44th president. He had several, I forget how many votes it was. It was like over 60, I think it was over 68 million votes at the end of the day. He got over 68 million votes. And Donald Trump, in this particular election, in the 2020 election, is projected to have over 20 million votes cast for him. That's gone up to like 25 million, since I have looked at everything. And President-elect Joe Biden currently holds 80 million, 81 million votes. So that both, Joe Biden will be number 1 in the rankings, Trump will be number 2, and then Obama will be number 3 for the most popular candidates for presidency in the history of America in terms of total vote count, just sheer total raw vote count. And while this is an interesting piece of information, it's kind of worth highlighting that it does kind of show the deep divide within our country with regards to how Trump and Biden did, because those are not small numbers. This is not like what happened with Barack Obama and John McCain. This is not like what happened with Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. There are millions of people who now recognize that there are millions of people who are on their side. It's like if you don't know if you have a friend or an ally in the room, you're less likely to speak or you're less likely to be engaging. Now a lot more people are polarizing themselves simply because they know there are people in their state or in their county who do see things the way that they do, and that they aren't such a small minority as what the legacy media would have you believe. So that is the current state of affairs with regards to that. And one more thing before we leave is, if you want to know, and I'm going to try and find a couple more examples of this. If you want to look at some of the different elections that happened in your state, specifically if you're a Massachusetts resident, you can go over to this website. It will be in the description. You just have to copy and paste it in. Where you can go, you can look at what each state did. This is the area where I am from, and as you'll notice, it's a more moderate to more red area. Just for reference, and you can see where my pointer is, this direction, past Royalston, probably more Warwick. If you go up this way, you're in Vermont. If you're more up here, you're going towards New Hampshire. So the Vermont and New Hampshire line and the Massachusetts line kind of apex sort of in this region here, near Warwick and Royalston, I believe. With regards to that, you can sort of see that trickling down into how people move and vote. This is over more near New York. This is over near Connecticut, but these are more rural or these have larger scale businesses. So for example, Agawam has 6 Flags. So of course, people who are more business oriented sometimes tend to go more Republican. So you'll see that. These are more rural areas. You'll see all these areas down here, Douglas, blah, blah, blah. You'll see this little section here. You'll see on the Cape. Oh, can't see that. You'll see in the Cape. It's a little bit different. You can switch it up. So these are the total raw vote totals in here. You can see, you can look at question 1, you can look at question 2, the different questions that happen on each of your ballots. You can look at the Massachusetts State Senate if you want to look there. We'll switch over to that real quick. Oops, switching over. But anyway, yeah, you get the idea. So this is something that you can look at. Oh, yeah, the map is a little bit different. You'll see how that sort of looked down. Those are both in the description. They're in a separate section. So please be aware of that. If there are other ones, they will also be in the description. So if you're from, most likely if you're from New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, please look there, because I will most likely look for those states first before I look for New York and the other New England areas with regards to an interactive map like this for the election. And if you're not from the New England area, I'm not looking specifically for Georgia, so don't ask. This is not happening. And we are going to close out the episode. I know that was very quick, and I know that was very brief, but this has sort of been, hammered in the 2020 election over and over and over again, and I really want to stress, if you want to read more about things that have happened and sort of understand where we are now, I would look at the links in the description below. Please, if you like what we're doing, like, share, and subscribe. Turn on that little notification button. I believe you can also turn on notifications in Instagram. We have an Instagram, @TheGraveAmerican. We are here on this channel. We have a questions email account. That's questionsplural.tga@gmail.com. That's questionsplural.tga@gmail.com. That is a wrap on this episode. This is the first episode that we are doing. I'm your host, Justice Graves, and we are here on The Grave American. I want to thank everybody for watching, whenever you're watching this. Again, links in the description, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will hopefully see you on the channel soon.